Minister, at the start of this year, the Seanad passed the Adoption, Identity and Information Bill proposed by myself and seconded by Senator Gillian Van Turnate. The bill passed the Seanad with unanimous support. It was also supported by groups representing adopted people and natural parents. In July, the Government indicated its intention to move this issue forward by bringing forward its own bill. I gave that Government announcement a cautious welcome at the time. I said I was glad to see any progress on this issue, but I was concerned that the Government bill might not be passed before the election. I also expressed some concerns about aspects of that bill, as did the Adoption Rights Alliance and the First Mothers Group. We're particularly concerned about two issues, one being the statutory declaration that adopted people would be forced to sign before being given their birth certs, and secondly the inclusion of an information veto provision allowing that in some circumstances an adopted person could be refused the basic information in their birth cert where so-called compelling reasons exist, although the heads of the bill didn't make it clear what exactly those compelling reasons might be. The Committee on Health and Children also looked at this issue. Recently, they listened to those concerns, they invited all the different groups in, and the various groups representing adopted people, natural parents, TUSLA were in, the Adoption Authority, lawyers such as Fergus Ryan, who had drafted my own bill, Conor O'Mahony, who is an expert on this area from University College Cork, and had very thorough consideration of all the issues involved. And after that, the committee also recommended changes on those two areas that I've mentioned, the statutory declaration and the compelling reasons for non-release. However, Minister, it's now the end of December, and I'm very concerned at this stage that the Government's proposed legislation is probably unlikely to get through the Oireachtas before Christmas. I think this is a source of great concern, not just to myself as a legislator, also as an adopted person, but also to tens of thousands of adopted people and natural parents all across the country who were separated through forced adoption. This is the first chance they've ever had to be given rights by the Irish Government. This issue has never been legislated on before, even though in the UK adopted people have had a right to their birth certs and their birth identity since the 70s, for decades also in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. There was great hope. I know when the Seanad passed my bill earlier on this year, I got letters from all over the country, many of them from elderly natural parents, women who were forced to separate from their children decades ago, who are getting on in years and are concerned that they might never get to meet their son or daughter before they pass away. Such women wrote to me in great hope and expectation, saying, "We're delighted to see that somebody's finally doing something about this, and I hope the legislation will be passed without further delay." So the reason I've tabled this debate here today is to ask you, I know you're attending on behalf of the Minister for Children, to ask you, will the legislation be brought forward by the Government before the election? Will it be amended to take account of the recommendations made by the Committee on Health and Children? And again, I suppose just to remind you that there is a bill on the order paper passed by this House, endorsed by the Government representatives in this House, who both stated at that time that they hoped that that bill would be progressed and that Government would work with myself, Senator Van Turnate and others in getting legislation through based on that bill. So just if the Government bill isn't going to be done in time, we'd urge you to look again at the fact that there is a Senate bill that has been passed, that's halfway through the process in the Oireachtas and could easily be brought through the door before the election.
And Tara. As the Senator is aware, the Government approved the publication of the Heads and General Scheme of the Adoption, Information and Tracing Bill 2015 last July. The bill is intended to facilitate access to adoption information and operates on the basis of a presumption in favour of disclosing information insofar as is legally and constitutionally possible. The bill will, for the first time, provide a statutory basis for the provision of information related to both past and future adoptions. It will provide clarity around the information that can be provided and the circumstances in which it can be provided. Efforts have been ongoing for many years to address the issues related to the provision of a statutory entitlement to identity information, in particular an original birth certificate to adopted persons. The overall policy objective in bringing forward proposed legislation on adoption information and tracing has always been to provide access to as much information as possible to adopted persons. The Adoption, Information and Tracing Bill 2015 provides that where an adoption was effected prior to the commencement of this bill, the information required to apply for a birth certificate will be provided to an adopted person when they have signed a statutory declaration agreeing to respect the privacy of their birth parent and not to contact their birth parent or ask anyone else to make contact on their behalf. There will be no requirement for an adopted person to sign a statutory declaration where birth parents have indicated a preference for contact, or consented to the release of the information, or where it is established that the birth parents are deceased. The bill also provides that where an adoption is effected after the commencement of this bill, the adopted person will be entitled to their birth certificate once they are aged 18 or over. The bill also provides that the Adoption Authority of Ireland will be responsible for collecting, restoring, preserving and safekeeping of adoption records, including information related to informal adoptions and persons whose birth was incorrectly registered. It will set out the information that must be retained by the authority for future adoptions and, insofar as it is available, for past adoptions, persons whose adoption is registered in the Registry of Inter-County Adoptions, informal adoptions and incorrect birth registrations. Persons who are the subject of incorrect birth registrations will be given access to service provision. The bill was referred to the Joint Oireachtas Committee for Health and Children for pre-legislative scrutiny, and the committee published a report recently. The committee's key recommendations were that the definition of compelling reasons be further clarified and more tightly defined in the bill. In cases where non-disclosure is sought, citing compelling reasons, this should be supported by medical evidence. That consideration should be given to excluding the statutory declaration provision from the bill. This could possibly be replaced by an alternative provision where the applicant is required to attend one preparatory session to discuss and explore the issues concerning privacy and respect before the birth certificate is released. That consideration should be given to reducing the lead-in to a much shorter time period and to holding a shorter, more intense information awareness campaign over a 6-month period to include engagement with social media and a wide range of community groups who can help raise awareness about the new register. In the case of the illegally adopted, that consideration should be given to establishing a dedicated unit to actively investigate those cases, and that a review of service requirements arising from the bill be undertaken. Minister Riley welcomes the report of the Oireachtas Committee and believes it is a valuable contribution to the debate on this important bill. He has examined the recommendations of the committee very carefully and will shortly finalise the bill in light of the committee's recommendations. The heads will be submitted to the Office of Parliamentary Counsel very shortly with a request to draft the bill as a matter of urgency. In view of the size and complexity of the bill, Minister Riley does not want to offer any guarantees about how quickly it can be finalised. However, he can assure the Senator that he will work closely with the Attorney-General to facilitate the bill's completion as soon as possible.
I appreciate the Minister of State is answering on behalf of the Minister for Children, but I have to say I'm very disappointed that there is no commitment in the reply to passing the bill before the election. As I said, thousands of people are waiting on this legislation. It's a hugely important piece of legislation for so many Irish people who are separated through adoption, people who I know the Minister of State's own brief is in relation to equality. What equality do you have when you don't even know who you are? You know, for 30 years of my own life, I didn't know my original name, I didn't know where I came from, I didn't know anything about my parents, I didn't know my medical history, didn't know any of that. I thankfully now finally eventually found my mother and I have that information. There are tens of thousands of people across this country who don't. As I said, there are elderly women all across Ireland who were forced to separate from their children decades ago and don't know if they're okay or not. The Minister has probably seen the movie Philomena. About her story. I get letters all the time from other women who had the same experience, who've spent decades looking for their lost son or daughter and can't find them due to resistance on the part of this state. The reply says this is a complicated issue. I don't agree. As I said, this system has already been in place in the UK for decades, in Northern Ireland, in Wales and elsewhere. We've seen lots of complex legislation being rushed through this House in the last few weeks, so I think where there's a will, there's a way. We've seen the Legal Services Bill, which was an extraordinary process, I have to say, in terms of how that bill came through this House with the number of amendments the government brought forward to its own bill to make sure it could pass that legislation before the recess, before the House finishes for the election. So I would just urge the Minister of State to talk to Minister Riley about this and just remind him again that there is a Senate bill that has passed halfway through the House that in fact actually is closer to the recommendations of the of the Committee on Health and Children than the government bill. Most of the issues that the Committee on Health and Children were critical of weren't issues, weren't in the bill that I brought forward with Senator Van Turnout. So I would just ask you to look at this again. I genuinely believe that if the interest was there, I understand it would require resources on behalf of the draftsman to get it done in time, but this is the first time we've ever got a government this far to almost legislating for adoption rights, and I would just urge you to make sure that you go the full distance and let's work together to make sure that this is done.
Thank you. Tara?
Yeah, I appreciate the Senator's commitment to this issue, and I appreciate her own personal connection with the issue, and I will endeavour to discuss the issue with Minister Riley and ensure that whatever progress we can make in this bill before the ending of the term of Parliament, that it can be done.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for attending. Tá an sí ar fionraí go dtí leathuair tar éis in Gaeilge.